This is Black Wall Street Chronicles, and we're back at it again. Thank you for listening to my podcast. In today's episode, we're going to talk about the Bonnie and Clyde syndrome. But before we get started, I have some announcements. I've recently uploaded my RSS feed of my podcast onto YouTube. And if you want to watch my podcast on YouTube, you can go to Black Wall Street Tech at youtube.com. That's Black Wall Street Tech on youtube.com. If you can, like and subscribe. And if you want to, you can sign up for my YouTube membership badges. My bronze membership badge is $5.99. My gold membership badge is $9.99, and my platinum membership badge is $27.99. So, if you want to suddenly sign up to my monthly membership badges, you can. But if you cannot, again, all you have to do is push like and subscribe, and please watch my content until the end. Thank you. I'll be right back. This is Black Wall Street Chronicles. Thank you for coming back. Now, we're going to talk about the first article that I'm going to read about the Bonnie and Clyde syndrome. Article comes from the website psychiatrytoday.com. The article is called Passion Victim, a brief look at his hybristophilia. Let's start with the key talking points. Hybristophiles are sexually attracted to criminals. The paraphilic behavior is also known as the Bonnie and Clyde syndrome. Some speculate that hybristophiles are narcissistic enablers who are attracted to power. Many hybristophiles have low self-esteem and often have been victims of physical and sexual abuse. Hybristophilia was defined by the sexologist Professor John Money as a sexual paraphernalia in which an individual desires sexual arousal and pleasure from having a sexual partner who is known to commit an outrage of crimes such as SA, murder, or armed robbery. This type of paraphilic behavior is sometimes colloquially known as the Bonnie and Clyde syndrome. In most cases, the person who is the focus of sexual desire is someone who has been in prison. In some cases, the hybristophile may urge and coerce their partner to commit a crime. In other cases, the hybristophile may contact someone who is already in prison that they do not know except by reputation or what they have read and seen in the media. For instance, it is well known that serial killers, particularly those who have received lots of media publicity, receive lots of fan mail for female admirers, some who are likely to be genuine hybristophiles. High-profile murderers and serial killers that are known to have received sexual fan mail include Charles Manson, Jeffrey Dahmer, Richard Ramirez, and Ted Bundy. Compared to other paraphilic behaviors, hybristophilia is quite unusual in that it is more common in women than in men. In a 2006 book chapter review by Corey Vitello, he notes that unlike most paraphilic behaviors, hybristophilia is more common among females and that it varies in both disposition and degree. Types of hybristophiles. According to the Love Art History website, there are two types of hybristophiles: passive hybristophile and aggressive hybristophile. Passive hybristophilia compromise the individuals who have no desire to participate in criminal activity themselves, but they are sexually attracted to criminals, the so-called prison groupies or serial killer groupies. Although I have not yet seen any empirical proof, the LAH website claims that these women are usually delusional and will try to find excuses for what the criminal did. They will develop relationships with the criminal and they feel that they are special, that even though that their lover may have killed numerous people, he will never harm her. That usually they feel that they can change their lover and have rescue fantasies. Passive hybristophiliacs tend to put themselves in positions to be seduced, manipulated, and lied to by the people they fall for. Aggressive histophilia comprises of those individuals who actively help typically male criminals to commit the crime. Such people, usually female, will, according to the LAH website, help out their lovers with their criminal agenda by luring victims, hiding bodies, covering crimes, or even committing crimes. They are attracted to their lovers because of their violent actions and want to receive yet love, yet are able to understand that their lovers are psychopaths who are manipulating them. Both passive and aggressive hybristophiliacs tend to end up in abusive or unhealthy relationships. Vitello says that many female aristophiles are the ones who are actually planning all the crimes, and they coax their partner into carrying out the crime in order to become sexually aroused. Causes and motivations for hybristophilia. The reasons put forward as motivation underlying hybristophilia are highly speculative. It could be that those who are sexually attracted to criminals, particularly those who are infamous and have a high media profile, may love, crave the attention they vicariously receive. Maybe admirers are attracted to serial killers because they view them as ultra-masculine, and overly male because of the horrific and seemingly unmagical acts they have committed. As Vitello writes, citing from Carl Bruce's 2002 book, The Thrill of the Killer. Women, teens especially, have the unfortunate reputation for wanting to find a partner who fits the bad boy image. The sexy bad boy is a staple American icon. He embodies machismo, individualism, and all the other potent details of the U.S. bad boys come in differing degrees. And most women will confess to having a minor crush, at least one at the end of the spectrum. Maybe women fall for the bad boys because they are forbidden, because it's the ultimate taboo, thus the ultimate aphrodisiac. Consequently, those women do not grow out of the bad boy fixation, become a hybristophile because the image is so strongly paired with sexual arousal. They need to be with a notorious partner to achieve sexual pleasure. From an evolutionary perspective, maybe such females have some kind of unconscious biological drive that would view any children of such men as having a better chance of survival. Maybe hybristophiles have submissive traits, are narcissistic enablers who are attracted to power. Professor John Money said that the behavior may be caused by a reverse operating condition. He says, the opponent process converts negative into positive, tragedy into triumph, aversion into addiction. Two recreation examples of opponent process rehearsals on bungee jumping and riding a gravity-defying roller coaster. The novice whose apprehension amounts to sheer terror at first may, after a few trials, discover that terrors transmogrifies into exhilaration and ecstasy as the brain has been released a flood of its own opioid-like endorphins. Therefore, the thrill returns with each replete, totally replacing terror. Nonfiction author Sheila Heisenberg interviewed that many hybristophiles for a book, Women Who Love Men Who Kill, Though some of those intervened knew that their relationship was morally wrong, but others were described as delusional with idealized fantasies. The interviewees compromised ordinary women with ordinary jobs, teachers, nurses, although many have been in relationships, but the partner was violent or abusive, with the male being in jail. It could be argued that the woman felt safe in a way they haven't before, and it could perhaps be argued that in this particular situation, it was the woman that was in a position of power. Unsurprisingly, very of the few relationships could be described as normal, as most of the women maintained their relationships via the writing of letters or seeing the killer only very occasionally. Academically, much of this is confirmed in Vitello's review that asserts that Hebristophiles are often insecure, have low self-esteem, and often been victims of physical and sexual abuse. This, according to Vitello, makes them more vulnerable to deviant sexual preferences and criminality. However, Vitello also points out that many women are not victims at all and simply want to simulate their violent tendencies by collaborating with a perpetrator of violence. This piece overviews demonstrate that this is an area where empirical research is greatly needed, as what is known is based on anecdotal interview evidence and populist books. So according to this article, they acknowledge that the Bonnie and Clyde syndrome, also known as Hebristophilia, is a problem, but there is not enough research on it. There's just some books and some articles. I'm going to take a quick break, and when we come back, I'm going to read another article on Hebristophilia. This is Black Wall Street Chronicles, and we're back at it again. Thank you for listening. Keep tuning in, and we're going to keep it moving. This article I'm going to read is from Refinery 29. It's by Jeff Commons. It is called, Why Do Women Fall in Love with Serial Killers Like Ted Bundy? It's well known that the notorious serial killer Ted Bundy was put on trial in 1979 for the rape and murder of 30 young women. He was sent fan mail from women all over the world. According to Stephen McCard, the co-author of Ted Bundy, Conversations with a Killer, Ted received countless letters containing marriage proposals and pictures, some of them nude, each day of his trial. Women referred to as groupies were showed up to the courtroom with their hair parted in the middle wearing hoop earrings, on the assumption that this was the style worn by his victims. Some even dyed their hair brown to match the hair of those he murdered. In 1980, while still on trial, Ted married one of his admirers. He was executed for his crimes in 1989. Ted Bundy is the most famous case, but over and over again throughout history, bad men have won themselves legions of female fans. Jeffrey Dahmer, who committed the murders of post-mortem mutilations of 17 young men and boys, received love letters and gifts from women. Richard Ramirez, a serial killer dubbed the Night Stalker, who raped and tortured over 25 victims and caused the death of at least 13, also married one of his many female admirers. And most recently, Anders Breivik, the terrorist who murdered 77 people in Norway in 2011, mainly children, was reported to receive love letters from girls as young as age 16. A condition called hysterophilia exists to explain those who are sexually aroused by the object of their affection's wrongdoing. The internet has perpetuated this term today, and there is a histophilia tag on Tumblr, clicking as it opens a gateway to hundreds of posts exalting Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer, Richard Ramirez, Charles Manson, and among others, Eric Harris and Dylan Cookvold, the teenage perpetrators of the 1999 Columbine High School massacre. Some users from the community have even made their own memes because of 2017. Hisprophilia is often referred to as the Bonnie and Clyde syndrome, after the famous crime duo who also their gang were responsible for at least 9 deaths and countless robberies. Bonnie was an unusual criminal, and before meeting Clyde and joining him in a life of crime, was a prize-winning student. It was noted by a fellow gang runner that Bonnie herself never fired a weapon, and more tellingly, had no voice in the decisions made by Clyde. She remained devoted to Clyde until their deaths in 1934. So, who are these women who fall for the world's worst men? Laura Elizabeth Willett, author of the new book, The Love of a Bad Man, is trying to shed light on the matter. Her book consists of 12 short stories, snapshots, if you will, of the complicated lives of real-life women who had a relationship with men remembered as some of the most evil people to walk the planet. Each woman in the book is given her own voice, some more fictionalized than others, depending on the amount of evidence Willett was able to uncover. Eva Braun, mistress of Adolf Hitler, is one. Mira Hindley, girlfriend of the Murs murderers, and Ian Badley is another. Woodland covers Sadie Atkins, one of the Manson family. Marceline Baldwin, wife of Jim Jones of the Jonestown Massacre, and Carla Hummelock, who helped her husband Paul Bernard rape and murder 3 women and girls in Canada. We spoke to Willett about why she wrote the book and how she went about getting inside these women's heads. Now, these are questions I'm about to read between Refinery 29 and Miss Woodlet, who wrote this book. Why do you want to write this book? I've been drawn to true crime stories since I was a preteen. The stories suggest that attract me the most tend to be those committed by people from relatively normal, non-abusive upbringings. The how, the why in these cases is more interesting and mysterious to me. I find myself fascinated by female criminals for similar reasons. There's a sense of unlikelihood since women, for various reasons, are less associated with crime, especially violent crime. He proposed to Carly and she turned him down. Not long after that, he killed her family and forced her to run away with him, killing more people along the way. This is a quote from Elizabeth Woolley. How did you research these women? I read biographies, true crime books, court transcripts, newspaper articles, letters, anything relevant that I could get my hands on, really. I also watched documentaries of the original footage of them, when possible. Eva Braun notably had a lot of home movies. For voice and mood inspiration, I read novels and watched movies set in the times and places these women lived in, as well as listening to the music they liked, or what that was popular during their times. Did you notice any common threads between all these women? If there's one thing that was common to all these women, it was probably insecurity and the willingness to have their sense of self be determined by the men that they were involved in. I think insecurity is a very human thing, though. You'd be hard-pressed to find a person who isn't insecure in some way or hasn't been at some stage of their life. In general, young adults especially have a lot of insecurities, and they're less solid in their sense of self. The majority of the stories of the love of a bad man feature young women, even teenagers, and the women who don't fall for this category often met their partners when they were young or else had involvements with abusive men prior to meeting the titular bad men. How closely did you decide to stick to the truth? Much of the time, it had to do with the information that was available. It was easier to stick to the truth with subjects like Mira Henley and Eva Braun, for example, who have loads of books written about them. With these ones, it was most a matter of choosing anecdotes or points during their lives that best represented who they were, what they did, and how they got there. With others such as Janice Hooker and Veronica Compton, there was little information available, so my imagination had more than a free rein. I may never know how close I got to the truth with these stories. Did you intentionally set out to give these women a voice for us to empathize with them? Voice was extremely important to me. I wanted each voice to be unique and persuasive, and for each of these women to feel as real as the next. People, when they tell their own stories, generally try to garner sympathy and to present themselves in a vulnerable and human way. As I was writing these stories in first person, this was something that I kept in mind. What do you think is the attraction to bad men? It's hard to say where the figure of the bad man ends and the anti-hero begins. There's a huge crossover, and as a result, bad men are often romanticized. Tragically flawed but human, dark and sinister but exciting. As long as the anti-heroes are seen as attractive, bad men will be too on some level. In real-life terms, though, it is often less a matter of being attracted to exclusively bad men and more of the crumbs of goodness they offer. Attention when no one else is giving it, plush kittens, box of chocolates, moonlit drives, intelligent conversations. It's harder to see the bad if it's good and mixed in. How many women you write about do you think this would brainwash, and how many do you think were equally as evil as their male counterparts? I feel the term brainwashing is problematic, since it has an association of brainlessness and total powerlessness, which I don't think is completely true to the life and complexity of individuals. The most skilled manipulators, I believe, are those who tap into something latent within the manipulated person and challenge it, while allowing the manipulated person to retain a sense of agency, even, in some cases, strengthening their ego. This was a dynamic with many of the relationships I researched. It's not to say that these men weren't psychopaths, but it wasn't always clear-cut distinction between brainwashed follower and equal villain. Most, if not all of these women probably would have committed the same crimes if they did not have become involved with these men. On the other side of the coin, most of these men would haven't been such successful criminals if they didn't have dedicated women helping them. Carl Ann Fugate's story is perhaps the most shocking covered in the book. Did people feel sorry for her because of her age? Carl Ann Fugate was actually 13 when she became involved with Charles Starkweather. He was older than her by 5 years, but intelligently and emotionally was very unsophisticated. He proposed to Corel and she turned him down. Not long after that, he killed her family and forced her to run away with him, killing more people along the way. Looking at the evidence, it seems evident that Carwell was an unwilling accomplice. At the time, though, Carwell was seen as innocent. In the 1950s, she was a girl who had premarital sex, living in a Placid, Nebraska community, which had just been shaken by these violent murders, likely suffering from PTSD. A lot of people found her cold and snooty when she took to the witness stand. She was tried for first-degree murder and sentenced to life, though was paroled after 17 years. Do you think any of the men actually care for the woman that you've written about? There's certain evidence that some of them cared and had genuine affection for their woman. Serial killer Devin Burney exchanged over 2,000 letters with his partner, Kathy Bering. The couple was nicknamed Australia's Fred and Rose West before she cut off communication with him. Raymond Fernandez publicly declared his love for his partner, Martha Beck, before they was executed. If care is to find a willingness to put someone's needs and happiness before their own, however, a lot of these men wouldn't pass the test. A lot of people in general wouldn't. Were there any cases of research where you were actually very different from what you thought of them before? Bonnie and Clyde were a lot less glamorous and a lot less competent as criminals than the legends surrounding them. They was constantly getting injured, living in dirty conditions, eating poorly, and risking their lives for relatively small amounts of money. Most of them lost their family, and by the end, weren't having much fun living on the run. Who is the most interesting to research? A woman I didn't include in the book, Carolyn Moore Lawton, who was the mistress and closest advisor of Reverend Jim Jones of the Jonestown infamy. She ended up inspiring the novel I'm working on now, Beautiful Revolutionary, a fascinating woman and one who definitely fits the normal non-abusive upbringing camp. Do you have any favorite true crime books or podcasts to recommend? Hazel Junior High by Barab Ubgadi is a play based on the murder of a middle schooler, Shonda Shara, by 4 female classmates in 1992. It is a brutal pitch inquiry into the dark heart of girlhood, with a lot of the dialogue coming from the actual court transcripts. Paul's Case by Lynn Crosby is a book I've referred to a lot when writing The Love of a Bad Man. It's a rare one, genre-wise, part true crime, part poetry, part theoretical fiction, part indictment of the justice system. Not a book for everyone, but it blew me away. While researching my story, Charlie's Girls, I watched in the 1973 documentary Manson. It was comprised of original footage of the Manson family and interviews with its members of the Associated People. It was also so wonderfully 70s, full of dreamy musical interludes and psychedelic visuals. Of all the things I've encountered about the Manson family, this was the most immersive. I recently read and thoroughly enjoyed Jeff Gunn's The Road to Jamestown, and if you're looking to read a fresh, comprehensive history of the People's Temple in Jonestown, I highly recommend this one. Finally, I've just started listening to My Favorite Murder. I've never been a podcast person, but this is recommended to me a few times with good reason. Okay. This is the end of this article. I'm going to take a quick break. I'm going to give my opinion on the Bonnie and Clyde syndrome. I'll be right back.